The crimson snow of Kasara Prime had turned black with ash and blood. Kira Thesson knelt beside the twisted metal of what had once been a transport, her gloved hands trembling as they hovered over the still form of her mate. Jorik's silver blue skin had already begun to pale in the bitter cold, his normally luminous violet eyes now dim and lifeless. "By the 7 stars," she whispered, her breath forming crystals in the frigid air. "You promised me we'd see the spring moons together." The Valari warrior had seen death before, had dealt it with precision and honor in countless battles across 3 systems. But this was different. This hollowed her out from within, leaving nothing but an aching void where her heart used to beat. Jorik had been more than a mate. He had been her anchor, her reason for surviving each bloody campaign in this endless war between her people and the humans. She pressed her forehead against his chest, feeling the cold metal of his armor beneath her skin. The traditional mourning words came to her lips in their ancient tongue, each syllable carrying the weight of centuries. "Until the stars burn cold, until the void claims all light, I carry your memory within me." The distant rumble of approaching vehicles made her violet eyes snap open. Human forces. Her hand instinctively moved to the plasma rifle at her side, but she found she couldn't bring herself to care. Let them come. Let them finish what they'd started. The vehicles stopped 50 meters away, their engines growing quiet. Kira didn't look up as boots crunched through the snow toward her. Multiple soldiers by the sound of it. She remained kneeling, her arms wrapped around Jorik's shoulders, waiting for the inevitable. "Ma'am." The voice was deep, gravelly, but surprisingly gentle. "I'm Commander Dante Cross, 3rd Fleet Marines." Kira finally raised her head, meeting the gaze of a human male with steel-gray hair and weathered features. His dark brown eyes held something she hadn't expected, not triumph or cruelty, but a weary recognition of loss. Behind him stood 4 other Marines, their weapons lowered but ready. "Come to collect your prize?" she asked in accented standard, her voice hoarse with grief. Cross stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "No, ma'am. We came to secure the crash site, but..." He glanced at Jorik's body, then back to her face. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words hit her like a physical blow. In 3 years of war, no human had ever offered her condolences. They were supposed to be savages, weren't they? Beings without honor or compassion? "He was your enemy," Kira said, confusion creeping into her tone. "He was a soldier, same as me, same as you." Cross removed his helmet, revealing graying temples and deep lines around his eyes. "How long were you bonded?" The question caught her off guard. 2 seasons. We planned to request colony assignment after this campaign." Her voice broke on the last word. Cross nodded slowly, then turned to his soldiers. "Set up a perimeter. Nobody approaches without my direct order." He looked back at Kira. "Take the time you need. Everyone deserves to say goodbye properly." One of the younger Marines stepped forward. "Sir, regulations state..." "I know the regulations, Corporal." Cross's voice carried the authority of years in command. "But I also know that Warrior's code transcends species. She stays until she's ready to go." Kira stared at this human commander who spoke of honor and showed mercy to his enemy. "Why?" she whispered. Cross was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Because 2 months ago I held my brother's body in the ruins of Kepler Station, and I would have given anything for someone to let me mourn in peace, instead of rushing me to the next battle." Something shifted in Kira's chest. Not healing, but the faintest recognition that healing might someday be possible. She returned her attention to Jorik, beginning the complex ritual of farewell that would release his spirit to join their ancestors among the stars. As she worked, she remained aware of Cross standing guard nearby, ensuring her privacy while protecting both their peoples from further bloodshed. When she finally completed the ceremony an hour later, she found him waiting with a thermal cloak. "The transport back to your lines won't arrive until morning," he said, offering the garment. "It's going to get colder." Kira accepted the cloak, wrapping it around her shoulders. The human's kindness felt surreal, like something from a dream. Your superiors won't approve of this treatment. Probably not. Cross managed a tired smile. But some things matter more than approval ratings. As the alien suns set behind the smoke-filled clouds, casting the battlefield in shades of amber and red, Kira found herself studying this unexpected enemy who had shown her more compassion than many of her own kind. For the first time since the war began, she wondered if there might be more to humans than she'd been taught to believe. Perhaps there was more to this one human, at least. The neutral zone medical facility on Terminus Station hummed with the controlled chaos of a temporary ceasefire. Built hastily from prefabricated modules, it served as a sanctuary where Vailari and human medical personnel worked side by side, their ancient enmity temporarily set aside for the greater good of healing. Kira sat in the observation deck, staring out at the stars through reinforced transparasteel. 3 days had passed since Jorik's death. 3 days since that human commander had shown her an impossible kindness. Sleep eluded her, replaced by fragments of memory that cut like glass shards through her consciousness. Can't sleep either. She turned to find Commander Cross approaching, 2 steaming cups in his hands. He looked as exhausted as she felt, his uniform wrinkled from long hours tending to wounded soldiers from both sides. Sleep brings dreams, Kira replied softly. Dreams bring him back, only to lose him again when I wake. Cross settled into the chair beside her, offering one of the cups. Human coffee, probably nothing like what your people drink, but it helps with the staying awake part. Kira accepted the offering, inhaling the rich, bitter aroma. We have something similar, Vethara beans from our homeworld's mountain regions. She took a tentative sip and was surprised by the warmth that spread through her chest. This is pleasant. My brother got me hooked on the stuff during academy training. Cross's voice carried the same note of loss she'd heard before. Said real warriors drink it black, no additives. Took me months to realize he was just too cheap to buy. Sweetener. Despite herself, Kira felt her lips curve slightly. You speak of him easily. Does the pain not cut as deeply for humans? It does. Cross stared into his cup. But I've learned that keeping the good memories locked away doesn't honor the dead. It just makes the living more miserable. He glanced at her. What was Jorik like before the war, I mean? The question should have been intrusive, painful. Instead, Kira found herself wanting to answer. He was gentle. That sounds strange for a warrior, but he could disarm an enemy with words as easily as weapons. He believed this war was a mistake, that our peoples had more in common than our leaders wanted to admit. Smart man. Cross took another sip of coffee. What did he think we had in common? Both species are explorers. Both value family, honor, the protection of those we love. Kira's voice grew thoughtful. He said the only real difference was that humans reach for the stars with reckless hope, while Vailari approached them with careful reverence. And which way did he think was right? He said, maybe we needed both. Maybe that's what we were supposed to learn from each other. They sat in comfortable silence, watching supply ships dock and depart in the distance. The coffee grew cold in their hands, but neither seemed to notice. I brought something, Cross said eventually, reaching into his jacket pocket. He produced a small device and a worn deck of cards. Music player and standard cards, figured you might want a distraction. Kira examined the cards with curiosity. The designs were foreign but intricate, with symbols that seemed to tell stories. What kind of distraction? Poker. It's a game of strategy, luck, and reading your opponent. Cross began shuffling with practiced ease. Though I should warn you, I'm pretty good at it. I am Vailari, Kira said with the first hint of pride she'd shown in days. We are trained to read body language and micro-expressions from childhood. Your human game will present no challenge. Cross's grin was the first genuine expression of joy she'd seen from him. We'll see about that. 2 hours later, Kira was staring at her empty pile of betting chips while Cross organized his winnings with obvious satisfaction. This game is rigged, she declared, though there was no real anger in her voice. No species develops such elaborate methods of deception for mere entertainment, says the woman who convinced me she had a winning hand 3 times in a row with nothing but a pair of 5s. Cross dealt another hand. You're a quick learner. Too quick, actually. It's making me nervous. Nervous enough to lose? Kira picked up her cards, studying them while watching Cross's reflection in the window. Nervous enough to change the stakes. Cross met her gaze directly. Winner gets to ask the loser one question, any question, and it has to be answered honestly. Kira considered this, weighing the risk against her curiosity about this enigmatic human. Acceptable. But I choose the game this time. She produced a small crystalline device from her own pocket. When activated, it projected a 3-dimensional maze of light between them. Cathedral. The game of paths and memory. We must navigate our piece through the maze while it changes every few seconds. First to reach the center wins. Cross studied the shifting patterns with interest. Looks complicated. Everything worth doing is complicated, Kira replied, manipulating her light construct with fluid gestures. The game proved more challenging than either expected. Cross's spatial reasoning was excellent, but Kira's familiarity with the patterns gave her an advantage. When her piece finally reached the center, she leaned back with satisfaction. My question, she said, then paused, considering. Why did you really help me on Kessera Prime? The truth, not the noble answer you gave your soldiers. Cross was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently shuffling the cards. Because when I saw you kneeling there holding him, I saw myself 8 weeks ago, and I remembered thinking that if just one enemy soldier had shown me a moment of basic decency, it might have saved me from some very dark thoughts. Dark thoughts? The kind that make you wonder if the war is worth surviving. His voice was barely above a whisper. You looked like I felt, like you were ready to let go of everything. Kira felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than shared grief. You saved my life that day, not from your soldiers, but from myself. Maybe we saved each other. The observation deck grew quiet except for the distant hum of life support systems. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of mortality playing out in their light. But inside, 2 souls who had every reason to hate each other instead found the beginning of understanding. Another game? Cross asked eventually. Yes, Kira replied, but she was no longer thinking about cards or crystalline mazes. She was thinking about how this human's presence had become a comfort instead of a threat, and how that should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in days, she felt almost at peace. The abandoned research station on Valdris Minor had become an unlikely sanctuary. Built into the side of a crystalline mountain, its empty corridors now served as neutral ground for the ongoing ceasefire negotiations. Commander Cross and Kira found themselves assigned to joint patrol duties, monitoring the perimeter for violations of the fragile truce. Contact, bearing 270. Kira whispered into her comm unit, her enhanced vision tracking movement through the violet-tinted forest below, 4-legged approximately 2 meters at the shoulder. Cross adjusted his scope, following her guidance. Got it. Valdrian mountain cat by the look of it. Probably just hunting. He lowered his weapon. Good eye. I would have missed it entirely. Vylari vision is adapted for twilight worlds, Kira explained, settling back against the rocky outcropping they'd chosen as their observation post. Your people see better in bright light, but we excel in shadow. Complementary evolution, Cross mused. Jorik might have been onto something with his theory about our species being meant to work together. The casual mention of her mate's name should have stung, but Kira found that Cross's respectful references to Jorik had become oddly comforting. He spoke of the dead warrior as if he'd known him personally, honoring his memory rather than dismissing it. He would have liked you, she said quietly. He always said the best warriors were those who fought for something greater than themselves. What do you fight for, Kira? The question caught her off guard. In the past, she would have given the standard answer about Vailari honor and the protection of their worlds. But sitting here beside this human who had shown her more consideration than many of her own kind, the words felt hollow. I used to fight for duty, for my people's survival. She paused, watching the mountain cat disappear into the underbrush. Now I'm not sure what I'm fighting for. Maybe that's progress. Their conversation was interrupted by a low rumble from deeper in the forest. Cross immediately raised his rifle, scanning for threats, while Kira's hand moved to her plasma sidearm. "That's not a predator," she said, her voice tense. "Equipment malfunction, maybe, or—" The ground beneath them shuddered, and a section of the mountainside collapsed in a shower of crystal and stone. Through the settling dust, they could see the twisted remains of what had been a geological survey drone, its power core sparking dangerously. "Unstable power source," Cross said, studying the readings on his scanner. "If that goes critical, it'll take out half the mountain and compromise the research station." "How long do we have?" "Maybe 20 minutes. Not enough time to get a disposal. Team up here." Kira was already moving, rappelling down the cliff face with fluid grace. "Then we handle it ourselves." Cross followed, his movements more cautious but equally determined. Together, they approached the wreckage, their previous roles as enemies forgotten in the face of immediate danger. "I can contain the reaction," Kira said, examining the failing power core. "But I'll need to maintain physical contact with the stabilization matrix. If I let go, the whole thing blows," Cross finished. "What can I do?" "The containment field. Generators are scattered. You need to recalibrate them to create a dispersal pattern while I hold the core stable." Working in perfect synchronization, they began the delicate process of preventing a catastrophic explosion. Cross's technical skills complemented Kira's instinctive understanding of energy patterns, their different approaches to problem-solving creating a solution neither could have achieved alone. 15 minutes in, disaster struck. A secondary power surge knocked Cross off his feet, sending him sliding toward a crevasse that hadn't been there minutes before. Kira, still maintaining her grip on the power core, watched in horror as he caught himself on the edge, his legs dangling over empty space. "Don't let go," he called up to her. "I can pull myself up." But Kira could see what he couldn't, the stress fractures spreading through the crystal outcropping he was clinging to. In seconds, it would give way completely. Without hesitation, she abandoned the power core and dove toward him, catching his wrist just as the crystal shattered. The sudden weight nearly pulled her over the edge as well, but she managed to brace herself against a solid rock formation. "I've got you," she gasped, straining to pull him up. "But the power core! Forget the core! We need to get out of here!" Together, they scrambled away from the unstable wreckage just as it finally detonated. The explosion, while spectacular, was contained enough by their earlier work to avoid catastrophic damage. They found themselves pressed against the mountainside, breathing heavily, very much alive and very much alone. In the aftermath of adrenaline and shared danger, something shifted between them. Kira became acutely aware of Cross's proximity, the warmth of his body against hers, the way his dark eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained defenses. "You chose me over the mission," he said softly, his face inches from hers. "I couldn't watch you fall." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Kira." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her silver-blue skin. "This is dangerous. Territory we're walking into." "I know." But she didn't pull away. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her own hand covering his. "I know this violates everything we're supposed to believe about each other. I know it's impossible. And yet here we are." The kiss was inevitable, gentle at first, then deeper as barriers that had taken lifetimes to build crumbled in moments. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, the weight of what they'd just acknowledged settling between them. "This can't happen again," Kira said, even as her body contradicted every word. "No," Cross agreed, his thumb still tracing patterns on her skin. "It can't." But even as they spoke the words, both knew they were lying. Something had been awakened between them that wouldn't be easily silenced. As they made their way back, to the research station to report the incident. Neither mentioned the way their hands kept finding each other, or how the space between them seemed charged with possibility. That night, as Kira lay in her assigned quarters staring at the ceiling, she replayed the moment when Cross had nearly fallen. The terror she'd felt, the absolute certainty that saving him mattered more than completing their mission. It had revealed a truth she wasn't ready to face. Somewhere along the way, this human had stopped being her enemy and started being something far more dangerous. Someone she was beginning to care about more than her own life. In the morning, they would return to their duties, maintaining the careful facade of professional cooperation. But both knew that everything had changed. The war between their peoples might continue, but the war between their hearts had already been decided. The hydroponics bay had become their secret refuge. Hidden deep within the research station's agricultural section, it offered privacy among the growing food supplies that sustained both human and Vylari personnel during the extended negotiations. Kira arrived first, as always, her pulse quickening at the familiar scent of earth and growing things that reminded her of home. "You're early." Cross's voice came from behind a row of protein vine trellises, warm with the affection they could only express in private. "The night shift changes in 10 minutes, Kira replied, moving toward him through the maze of growing plants. I wanted every moment we could steal. 3 weeks had passed since their first kiss. 3 weeks of clandestine meetings that had become the center of both their worlds. What had begun as intellectual attraction and shared grief had deepened into something that consumed their thoughts and haunted their dreams. Cross emerged from between the plant rows, and Kira's breath caught, as it did every time she saw him. The way his eyes lit up when he looked at her, the gentle strength in his hands as he reached for her. It was becoming impossible to remember why they were supposed to be enemies. "I brought something," he said, producing a small datapad. "Music from Earth. Thought you might like to hear what human musicians sound like when they're not composing battle hymns." Kira settled beside him on the makeshift bench they'd constructed from shipping crates, accepting the earpiece he offered. The melody that filled her head was unlike anything she'd expected. Complex, emotional, speaking to something universal in the experience of love and loss. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "What is it called?" "Clair de Lune. It means moonlight in an old Earth language." Cross's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her closer. "Seemed appropriate, since you shine like moonlight yourself." Compliment sent warmth through her entire body. When he spoke to her like that, with such tender reverence, it was easy to forget the impossible nature of their situation. Easy to pretend they were just two people discovering love, rather than representatives of species locked in generations of war. "Dante," she said softly, using his first name as she only did in these stolen moments. "What happens when the negotiations end, when we're ordered back to our respective fleets?" His jaw tightened, the same pain she felt reflected in his expression. "I don't know. I try not to think about it. We can't avoid it forever." Kira turned in his arms to face him fully. "My superiors are already asking questions about my reports. They want more detailed intelligence about human tactical capabilities, weaknesses they can exploit. Mine, too." Cross's voice was heavy with guilt. "Admiral Chen requested a psychological profile of Vylari command structure. He seems to think our extended contact gives me special insight." The weight of their divided loyalties pressed down on them both. They were warriors trained from childhood to put duty above personal desire. Yet here they sat, hearts full of love for someone their peoples considered the enemy. "I can't do it anymore," Kira said suddenly. "I can't pretend to gather intelligence on you while—" She gestured helplessly between them. "While we're falling in love," Cross finished quietly. The words hung in the air between them, the first time either had spoken the truth aloud. Love. It was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely forbidden. "Yes," Kira whispered. "While we're falling in love." Cross cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Then we're both traitors to our own kinds." "Perhaps." Or perhaps we're the only ones who see clearly. She leaned into his touch. Yorick believed this war was a tragedy of misunderstanding. Maybe he was right. Maybe what we feel for each other is proof that there's another way. A way that gets us both court-martialed and executed for treason. I know. Her voice was steady despite the tears. I know what we're risking. Cross searched her eyes for a long moment, then pulled her into a kiss that was desperate with the knowledge of how precious and fragile their time together had become. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. The careful control they maintained in public completely abandoned. I love you, he said against her lips. God help me. I love you more than duty, more than honor, more than my own life. And I love you, Kira replied, her voice breaking with emotion. In every language I know, in ways I don't have words for. You've become my whole world, Dante. What followed was inevitable, their bodies expressing what words couldn't fully capture. In the soft light of the growing plants, surrounded by the promise of new life, they came together with a passion that was both tender and desperate. Every touch was worship, every kiss a prayer to whatever forces had brought them together against all odds. Later, as they lay entwined among the blankets they'd hidden there for these stolen moments, Kira traced patterns on Cross's chest with her fingertips. There's going to be a resumption of hostilities, she said quietly. My commanding officer received orders yesterday. The ceasefire ends in 72 hours. Cross went very still beneath her touch. Admiral Chen got similar orders. Something about strategic resources on the outer rim being too valuable to leave contested. So it begins again. Kira's voice was hollow. All the death, all the destruction, all the hatred. Unless... Cross sat up, his expression suddenly intense. Unless we do something about it. What do you mean? I have access to both fleets' tactical plans. You know the Vylari strategies better than any human alive. He gripped her shoulders gently. Together we could prevent the worst of it. Share information that would make a quick, decisive victory impossible for either side. Force them back to the negotiating table. Kira stared at him, understanding the magnitude of what he was suggesting. That's not just treason, Dante. That's actively sabotaging our own people's war efforts. To save lives on both sides. To give peace a real chance. His eyes burned with conviction. I can't go back to killing Vylari, knowing what I know now. Knowing that some of them might be as honorable and beautiful as you. And I can't fire on human ships, knowing some of them might contain men as good and brave as you. Kira closed her eyes, weighing duty against love, honor against hope. If we do this, there's no going back. We'll be marked as traitors by both our peoples. Then we'll have to find somewhere new to call home. The enormity of the decision settled over them both. To choose love over loyalty, to risk everything for the chance at a future together. It went against everything they'd been taught, everything they'd believed about themselves. But as Kira looked into Cross's eyes, she knew the choice had already been made. Somewhere between that first moment of compassion on a frozen battlefield and this instant of desperate love, they had crossed a line from which there was no return. 72 hours, she said finally. We'll need to be very careful about how we share the information. Too obvious and we'll be caught before we can make a difference. Cross smiled, the expression bright with relief and determination. Together, Kira agreed, sealing their pact with a kiss that tasted of hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small acts of love and rebellion playing out in their light. But, in the hydroponics bay, two souls who had found each other across an impossible divide prepared to risk everything for the chance to build a world where love might triumph over war. 2 years later, the morning sun of Harmony's world cast long shadows across the construction site where their new home was taking shape. Kira stood on the porch of their temporary shelter, watching Cross direct the placement of solar collectors, with the same tactical precision he'd once used to deploy troops. The sight made her smile as it did every morning, This man she loved, channeling his military expertise into building rather than destroying. The Foundation crew says they'll have the main structure ready by next week, Cross said, climbing the steps to join her. His hair had grown longer in their exile, and the permanent tension that had marked his military years had softened into something approaching peace. Good timing. Kira placed his hand on her slightly rounded belly, enjoying the way his eyes widened with wonder every time he felt the baby move. She's getting impatient. She? Cross's grin was bright with joy. The medical scanner confirmed it. This morning, Dr. Rena says everything looks perfect, a healthy hybrid of both our species. Kira leaned into his embrace. She'll have your stubborn streak and my night vision if the genetic markers are accurate. Cross laughed, the sound carrying across the settlement that had become their refuge. Harmony's world was aptly named, a frontier planet that had become home to dozens of mixed couples like themselves, refugees from the war who had chosen love over loyalty. The community they'd helped establish was small but growing, a testament to the possibility of peace between their peoples. Any word from the latest arrivals? Kira asked, nodding toward the landing pad where another transport had arrived that morning. 3 more couples, and 2 families with children. Cross's expression grew serious. The war's escalating again. Admiral Chen launched a major offensive against the Proxima colonies, and my people retaliated by targeting the human agricultural worlds. Kira sighed, the familiar weight of distant conflict settling on her shoulders. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice, Dante. If we should have tried harder to stop it from within. We tried. The intelligence we shared bought them 6 months of stalemate, forced both sides back to negotiations twice. Cross tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. But in the end, some people are more comfortable with hate than hope. We can't save those who don't want to be saved. But we can save ourselves and build something better for her. Kira's hand moved protectively over their unborn daughter. A world where she won't have to choose between species, where she can be both human and Vailari without apology. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Elena Vasquez, the settlement's coordinator and a former human diplomat, emerged from the administrative building with a data pad in hand. Morning, you two. I've got the final permits for your house and some interesting news from the communications center. Good news or bad news? Cross asked, though his tone suggested he was prepared for either. Potentially very good. We received a transmission from the Neutral Zone Council. They're officially recognizing Harmony's world as a sovereign territory, with full diplomatic immunity. Elena's smile was bright with satisfaction. We're no longer refugees, people. We're citizens of our own world. The implications hit both Kira and Cross immediately. Diplomatic recognition meant protection from prosecution, the right to establish formal trade relationships, and most importantly, legitimacy for their growing community. There's more, Elena continued. The Council wants to send a delegation to document our society. Apparently, we're being cited as a successful model for post-conflict integration. Other mixed settlements want to follow our example. Kira felt tears prick her eyes. When they'd first arrived on Harmony's world with nothing but the clothes on their backs and love in their hearts, she'd never imagined their desperate gamble might inspire others. We're not just survivors anymore, she whispered. We're proof that there's another way. That evening, they held an impromptu celebration in the settlement's central plaza. Musicians from both species played together, creating melodies that had never existed before their collaboration. Children who were living bridges between 2 worlds ran laughing through the crowd, while their parents shared stories and dreams for the future. Cross found Kira sitting slightly apart from the festivities, her hand resting on her belly as she watched their community celebrate. Thinking deep thoughts? He asked, settling beside her on the carved stone bench that had become their favorite spot for evening conversations. Thinking about Jorik, she said softly, wondering what he would think of all this. Cross was quiet for a moment, understanding the complex emotions behind her words. I think he'd be proud. His mate helped end a war, even if it was only for the people smart enough to choose love. And your brother? What would he think of his war hero sibling becoming a farmer and family? Man? He'd probably laugh and say it was about time I found something worth fighting for that didn't involve explosives. Cross wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They both knew love was stronger than hate, even if they didn't live to see it proven. As if responding to their conversation, the baby kicked forcefully, making both parents laugh. She's got opinions already, Cross observed, his hand joining Kira's on her belly. She's going to need them, growing up between worlds. Kira leaned her head against his shoulder. Promise me something, Dante. Promise me we'll tell her about the war, about what we chose to leave behind. But promise me we'll also tell her about what we chose to build. I promise. His voice was steady with conviction. She'll know she comes from love, not conflict, that her parents chose each other over everything else and never regretted it, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. Above them, the twin moons of Harmony's world rose in tandem, their combined light casting everything in silver and gold. In the distance, they could hear the laughter of their friends and neighbors, the sound of a community that had chosen hope over despair, unity over division. 3 months later, their daughter arrived with a lusty cry that announced her presence to the entire medical center. She had Kira's silver blue skin and Cross's dark hair, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of both their peoples. They named her Hope, a simple name that carried the weight of everything they'd sacrificed and everything they'd gained. As Kira held their daughter for the first time, watching Cross's face transform with wonder and love, she thought of the frozen battlefield where this all began, of two enemies who had found something worth saving in each other, and in doing so, had discovered a way to save themselves. The war between their peoples would end eventually, as all wars did. But here on Harmony's world, surrounded by love and possibility, they had already won the only victory that truly mattered. They had chosen each other, chosen hope, chosen to build instead of destroy. And in their daughter's bright eyes, the future looked very bright indeed. The end.